Listen, there's a really interesting story that I've been hearing about, reading about now for a couple of years actually, and Andrew Hale-Byrne is suing the UK government over a scandal that happened a couple of years ago. About 4 years ago, actually. It was in July 2019. Britain's top diplomat, the ambassador to Washington, Lord Darroch, he was then Sir Kim Darroch, resigned after a leak of top-secret cables in which he called President Trump inept, insecure and incompetent. Now, Trump branded Darroch a fool and a nobody. He said he wouldn't work with him, and then Sir Kim Darroch resigned. Hugely embarrassing diplomatic incident for the UK, with more lurid and explosive claims to follow. But who leaked the cables? Well, it led to the arrest of a British trade official, a man called Andrew Hale-Byrne, who, as I say, is now suing the UK government. He's a dual American-British citizen. And he has served as legislative assistant to the former chairman of US Foreign Affairs Committee. He's acted as an aide to the Deputy Speaker of the House of Lords, Foreign Affairs Special Rapporteur, Baroness Caroline Cox. I mean, he's had an illustrious career. He's also worked in the US State Department, the Ministry of Defence, the Department of International Trade, and in its Ministerial Strategy Directorate. But it's really interesting that he was lifted for this and actually had a very incredibly unpleasant time in terms of what happened. Andrew, I'm delighted, is on the line from Washington. Andrew Hale-Byrne is with me now. Andrew, thank you for joining me on talkTV.
Sure. Hello.
I understand. I understand this is your first broadcast interview, Andrew, and I mean, this is a very complex case, but we have time, but not all the time in the world. I just want to start with the basics. Tell us your job at the time, and tell us what the reasoning was given for your arrest.
Well, so just this summer, I should say that actually the Independent Officer of Police Conduct upheld my review against the Counter-Terrorism Command Police, which was, for me, a lot of vindication. And certainly it's a game changer with regards to the lawsuit that I've filed against James Cleverly and others for misfeasance in public office. So what happened was I came back to the civil service. I'd been in the civil service fostering before at the Ministry of Defense. I came back to civil service in 2017 after having worked in Washington for a Democrat member of Congress, actually from the San Francisco Bay Area. And I basically, the civil service had changed a great deal. You know, I asked my permanent secretary, Antonio Romeo, the very first week I was there in 2017, what's the ultimate goal you have this year for the Department for International Trade? And she said, that's a very good question. This time next year, I want to get the highest ranking from Stonewall as the most inclusive employer for transgendered and non-binary people. And I would have thought that she would have said something about trade policy, export wins, investment wins, free trade agreements, etc. So I personally thought there was, you know, I'm inclusive, nurturing, and affirming of members of the transgender non-binary community myself. In fact, one of my best friends from school has transitioned, and they remain my BFF from school. So I'm inclusive myself. But the point being is I just felt there was a misplace of priorities. And there was actually a lot of bullying at the time, and I raised a complaint about it. And the very people who referred me to the Counter-Terrorism Police were the very people I'd actually complained about.
So you believe you were victimized in this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, literally in 2019, immediately after the Kim Darroch's memos were leaked, someone who actually worked in Antonio Romeo's private office saw me in the corridor and said, it was you. And at the time I said, if you ever say that again, I'll sue you for defamation and libel. And I didn't really hear about that again, that particular allegation again, until I heard that two colleagues were actually in the Ship and Shovel pub, drunk and talking about how they were going to stitch me up for a bogus security breach. And then, of course, the day off, Kim Darroch was actually served a right to reply letter the day before from the Sun newspaper, the day before my home was raided. He was served a right to reply letter about the Sex for Secret story. He was accused of leaking U.S. state secrets in exchange for sex from a CNN journalist with whom he was having an affair. He refused that letter. And his wife actually came home later and she accepted it from the Sun newspaper. At that point, they were clear to publish. He never denied the story and has never denied the story. The very next day, my home was raided 3 years ago. And
tell us about that arrest. I mean, anti-terror police bursting through your front door. It must have been very, very shocking.
So I was before dawn. I was asleep. I'd actually recently had cancer surgery and I was actually at home. My colleagues at work knew that I was at home. I was in my sickbed. I had C. diff, which is a post-cancer infection. and which requires one to use the toilet a lot. It causes chronic diarrhea. And so I was actually in bed at the time when I heard all of a sudden the door crash down, screaming. I had a flatmate who was in the other part of the flat. She was a gastrointestinal cancer surgeon who was just about to go to the hospital to work and perform surgeries. And they went to her room first. And then they crowded into my room. They're standing over me. And they said, "You're under arrest for violation of Section 3 of the Official Secrets Act and misconduct in public office for intentionally leaking Kim Darroch's official sensitive documents, which these are not secrets, with the intention of damaging UK-US relations." And I, of course, said I didn't. And then they said, "Well, why would your colleagues accuse you of this?" And these people who, and the civil servants who actually pointed the finger, never actually told them I was actually at home, that I just had cancer surgery. And the police were surprised to see me in the condition that I was. One would have thought they would have moderated their behavior after that. And that's another issue with the police. But in fairness to the police, they did not know that I was sick and frightfully unwell. The very next day after this, the Counterterrorism Command police contacted the Sun newspaper and said, "Do not publish your story about Kim Darroch, the Sex for Secret story about Kim Darroch, because we've arrested your source." And the Sun newspaper confirmed that I was not the source. And they
just to be clear, you completely deny that you were the source of that leak.
Absolutely, 100%. These official sensitive documents had a distribution list. I was told by both the civil service and the police had a distribution of from 35,000 to 45,000 people. They're not secrets. These are called diplomatic telegrams, and they're basically, our diplomats will write a weekly report or something like that saying, "This week in Washington, I met this people, or I spoke at that trade association." And in some of his, Darroch used a lot of colorful language about President Trump and what he thought of him. I think you could read about that in any newspaper, or a lot of people might share those views.
But it's different when it's the US ambassador, certainly. Just tell us how you were questioned, how long you were questioned. Were you shown any alleged evidence of your involvement in the leak? Was this simply, was there anything they put to you that perhaps the counter-terror police or the authorities that questioned you might have thought led them to the conclusion that you were the leak?
Well, what happened is that they raided my home, and then they took all of my, they took all my electronic equipment, and from that they sent it all to GCHQ, and then basically took all of my, they printed everything out. So I was, so the very first time I was interrogated, they didn't really have anything, and they just sort of asked me if I did this and why would your colleagues accuse you of this. And they certainly didn't present any evidence to me that I had done it. It was just simply a case of my colleagues pointing the finger. But then after they actually got the stuff off my phone from GCHQ, they tried to make hay. First of all, they couldn't find anything to link me to this, and they got kind of desperate. They had to justify what they'd done to me, spending all this public money. The operation was called Operation Aspirite. I was investigated twice. In both investigations, they never came up with any evidence. The Crown Prosecution Service said that they didn't. And they got desperate. They tried to make hay out of some of my personal messages. And they handed me a copy of a selfie photograph I took at an event where Jacob Rees Mogg had been the speaker. I don't actually remember what he spoke about in his speech. He was a government minister at the time, I think at the Cabinet Office. And I asked a question during the Q&A session off the speech about, I think it was about the Northern Protocol, but that was kind of topical at the time. And then I asked him for a selfie, and he said, "Oh, sure." We had a selfie. And then he left the room, and it was pretty innocuous. Didn't think much about it. Sent the selfie to a friend. And we
can see the selfie on the screen now. It's literally you just smiling beside Jacob Rees Mogg, as you say, was a government minister at the time.
Yeah, and like I said, it was a very brief interaction, and they were saying, the police said to me, they asked me, "Why would you have your picture taken with someone who's so far on the right?" And they sort of tried to paint me as someone who was politically motivated, a far-right person, and someone who was a passionate supporter of Brexit. And they asked, the police were sort of asking me a myriad of irrelevant questions about photos and things on my phone. And I just said, what does any of this have to do with Kim Darroch's crimes of leaking U.S. state secrets to a CNN journalist with whom he was having an affair? and then they just shut right off.
Which we don't know whether he did or not, but as you say, he hasn't.
Actually, I have to correct you that I actually have read his text messages with Ms. Michelle Kaczynski, and they leave nothing to the imagination.
Okay, well, listen, I'm sure we actually asked Kim Darroch for a statement or even to come on the programme. He's welcome to do tomorrow. He's not here to defend himself. He hasn't replied to our emails yet, so we just need to be careful what we say in regard to Lord Darroch.
All this has been argued by my lawyers in court, and he has never denied the allegations.
Okay, sure. What happens now then? Because you've been, all of this has been dropped, presumably. What are the status of things now?
Well, the Operation Aspright, the police investigation into me, spectacularly failed, and then of course after that, my civil service colleagues, started pass the buck, cover their asses, and run for cover. I mean, this is boomeranged back upon them. I, of course, have sued the government for misfeasance in public office, for using me as a divergé tactic to take pressure off the Darroch story about the Sex for Secret leaks, this official cover-up, using me as a scapegoat. James cleverly has weaponized counter-terrorism legislation against me. He's one of the defendants of one of the offending departments.
Yeah, this is an interesting point, actually. Just explain this to our viewers and listeners, because there have been quite a lot of delays in this case, concern expressed by some politicians about the use of the Justice and Security Act by the government to have a closed hearing. Just tell us about that and whether this can be challenged and what you think is going on.
Well, so for example, this is counterterrorism legislation, and when the legislation was passed, I think in 2015, it was only ever meant to be used in cases of counterterrorism espionage. There's no counterterrorism or espionage in this. I've never accused Kim Darroch of counterterrorism or espionage, and no one has accused me of that. But basically, he has signed an application under the Justice Security Act, which basically puts this into a military-style secret court, where will be closed hearings. I will not be able. They've never provided a defense. They've never produced one, and if they ever do, I will never be able to read it. My lawyers will not be able to represent me. My barrister will not be able to represent me in the secret court. I'll have a special. It's called a special advocate appointed by the Attorney General, who's paid for by the government to represent me. So it's quite a farcical situation that's only ever used in cases. For example, I spoke to the special advocate just this past week, who were representing me, and that's probably the only time in my life I'll ever communicate with the person, because he had to hear my side of the story before he's allowed to go into this secret court and represent me. And basically, he said in his career doing this, it's always been cases of terrorism, particularly Islamist terrorism. So they're weaponizing counterterrorism legislation in a case where there's no terrorism. But then again, why did I have 14 fully armed counterterrorism police officers raid my home, break down the front door, when that is unprecedented as well? Normally, if one is accused of leaking official sensitive documents, which are the lowest, form of document concerning sensitivity, you would basically be called in by your internal security people in your department and asked, did you do this?
I mean, you're right about official sensitive documents. I dealt with a lot of official sensitive documents when I was a special advisor in government, and they are the lowest form, and basically not quite anybody in the civil service, but a lot of people in the civil service can see those, and as you say, there were many thousands of people who could have seen them. What effect has this had on your life, Andrew? It's changed things for you dramatically, hasn't it?
Well, it's changed things dramatically, and it's also been quite frustrating, because you mentioned special advisors. Special advisors said just a few months ago that the government legal department's position and tactics are to string this out as long as possible. I mean, I did actually sue the government this time last year. And at that time, Kim Darroch actually immediately took leave from the House of Lords. And the special advisor said the government's approach is to continually to kick this into the long grass, to keep me bottled up with satellite litigations about anything innocuous, to just so I eventually lose my resources. I can no longer pay lawyers to continually fight on. It's obviously a prohibitively expensive exercise. Has it changed my life? Certainly. I mean, for gosh sakes, I mean, they did everything they could to ruin it. I mean, I was put under house arrest. I was cut off from my bank accounts. I had no picture ID. I wasn't even allowed to even go home and visit family in Ledbury over Christmas. I had to actually sign the bail book at the police station that very day, Christmas Day. I mean, it was extraordinary. And after 6 months of this, of going through this hell, and I wouldn't have survived if friends hadn't brought me groceries and helped me pay my bills and what have you, because I was cut off from those resources. After 6 months of this, I just threw out all the the stuff about Kim Darroch and other colleagues in the civil service on the front page of an appeal document to the Crown Court appealing these horrible bail restrictions. And that very day, they were dropped. The police called me and said, on condition of me withdrawing that public document from the Crown Court, we'll drop these bail restrictions. We've just all of a sudden completed all of our inquiries. And then I got an internal email that was released to me by the Crown Prosecution Service, which confirmed that that was the reason that they were dropping the bail. So this, this.
And what happens next then? You're continuing this action and so on, but I mean, do you have the resources to do so? What happens next for you, Andrew?
Well, I don't think I'm going to be, I don't really see any benefit in having a secret closed court hearing in a military style court that I'm not even allowed to attend. This needs to be an open courtroom where the press and the public can scrutinize this. There's a public interest test that needs to be applied to all of this. As a U.S. citizen, I've actually met with U.S. constitutional lawyers just last week, and they tell me that I can actually sue as a U.S. citizen in American courts, and sue because what Kim Darroch did was done here in the United States when he was a diplomat. So I can actually bring a case against the British government. The British ambassador here in Washington can be served by my lawyers on behalf of the British government quite publicly, and then of course they won't be able to weaponize British counterterrorism legislation against them.
Okay, Andrew, thank you very much indeed. That's Andrew Hale-Byrne there, who's a former civil servant. I should say that we did ask Kim Darroch, Lord Darroch, for an interview. If he wants to do that tomorrow, I will very happily have him on the programme. We asked him for a statement as well. He hasn't replied to our emails about that, but we'll continue to ask him to come on. The Foreign Office were also asked for a statement or an interview on this. They haven't replied to us either. The Department of Business and Trade, which is Andrew's old department, it used to be the Department of International Trade, a very brief statement here. We do not comment on matters of national security nor of ongoing litigation or HR procedures. That is what the Department of Business and Trade, formerly the Department of International Trade, which was Andrew's department, said. Now, the Metropolitan Police has a much longer statement. I'm going to read the whole thing to you because we want to give them the right of the reply. We want to make sure that they have their voice too. Metropolitan Police spokesman told talkTV the Metropolitan Police launched a criminal investigation into alleged leaking of official communications excuse me, involving Sir Kim Darroch in July 2019. From the outset, officers have been open-minded about the circumstances and sought to follow the evidence wherever it led. In October 2020, a man was arrested in London on suspicion of offences under the Official Secrets Act and misconduct in public office. He was bailed and later re-bailed following a successful application to the Magistrates' Court. That man was further arrested, this is Andrew Hale-Byrne. The man was further arrested in January 2020 on suspicion of breaching bail conditions. He has since been released with no further actions. The criminal investigation is no longer active. In February 2022, the Met received a complaint containing allegations about the conduct of officers during these arrests. That complaint was reviewed by professional standards officers who found there was no misuse of powers by officers or breaches of the standards of professional behaviour. The complainant appealed this decision and raised concerns about the original handling of the complaint to the Independent Office of Police Conduct. The Independent Office of Police Conduct upheld that appeal and directed that the Met reopen the matter. We accept that the previous handling should have been more thorough, and we will now seek to engage with the complainant so we can progress our inquiries. The IOPC recommended that this work be carried out by the Metropolitan Central Professional Standards Unit, the Director of Professional Standards. This recommendation was considered by the Directorate of Professional Standards, which decided that it should remain with the relevant local professional standards unit. The rationale for this decision has been provided to the complainant. So that's all completely consistent with what Andrew Hale-Byrne has told us. As I say, Kim Darroch, we've asked him for an interview and indeed for a statement or any thoughts on this. If he wants to come on tomorrow, I'm here between 10 and 1. I will happily interview him or read out a statement that he wants to have. That offer remains open to Lord Darroch and, of course, the Foreign Office as well. If they get back to us, which they haven't so far, but if they get back to us, I will read out their statement or very happily do an interview with one of their ministers if they want tomorrow between 10 and 1 here on talkTV. Very, very interesting case. Andrew spoke very interestingly about how he was treated, and of course some of that action continues in terms of the legal action he was talking about. But I think it really there's some very, very big allegations in there, big scary things actually about how he was treated, especially after the criminal investigation has been dropped. So I thought that was really important to bring to you.